I just want to add some things about this particular post I made. You know, in this format, uh, I'm not a conservative. When it comes down to it, I probably have a lot of attributes, um, but I'm not. People can pick on. Well, you don't know this issue. You don't know all this little detail. Well, yeah, you're ideologically in a camp. I don't join camps. I I've held liberal ideas in my head. I've held progressive ideas in my head, even feminist ideas in my head, and weighed them out. Tried it on for size. I've done that with conservatism. Um, and actually, I got to admit, I was leaning the other way. So the conservative stuff, I always kind of sounded like a conservative to my friends, at least tipping that direction. Uh, I remember one person in particular. Um, we had a very enjoyable conversation about politics, and she was more into it. And I love when people are into it. Um, but the what I was projecting to her as far as like principles and stuff, at the end of it, she's like, "Well, you definitely are a conservative." And I'm like, I realized looking back, I mean, she was revealing that she's even more lefty. We were both kind of meeting in the middle, but she was more left leaning than she was really admitting to me, and that's fine. Libertarians. I even used to drink with some politically connected ones. We had a thing, whatever day it was, every Wednesday at this bar. Um, so just talking it out and trying it on for size. I found eventually it's one of those things you see them hit a number of issues, and you start to look back after even like 4 or 5 years. Well, you didn't. Those weren't really principles because you changed quite a bit. I mean, one of them actually turned into a Bernie bro. I mean, I just can't imagine. But did I try on Bernie? That point of view. Yeah, during the 2009 crash, the 2008 crisis. Um, Occupy Wall Street. I thought that was pretty interesting. But then I found icky parts, and then it got ickier and ickier. Um, I read the stuff from Matt Taibbi. He was too left leaning. He kind of turned me off on some of his points, and then, he admits now that he made a mistake. He kind of went with the crowd as far as you know, grudgingly accepting that how it finally was decided, where the public got all the liabilities from the banks. He admits he kind of sounded too soft in the end on that, and would probably be harsher now. But that's fine. Um, but at the same time, and this is where the lefties around me just thought it was crazy. Um, the Tea Party was interesting too. I liked, they look more like my people. I come from a small town. I come from the working class. I have a bunch of memories as a kid, like at biker parties where silly hippies were hanging with actually dangerous Hell's Angels and stuff like that. Um, uh, you know, the, it's a joke. These, you don't have to stamp yourself with these labels, and the only reason people feel the need to do it is because they're basically a normie Republican, or they're basically a normie Democrat, or they're progressive Democrat, and not so much my age, but millennials. There's actual socialists. Um, uh, but I'm not. I'm not. None of that stuff really interests me. I want very little from the government, and I don't get very much from the government when it comes down to it. And I have a race story. There's a certain lean where you love that race story, and I've been really reluctant to talk about it, but I talk about it now because, if it earns points and people will listen to me, they get in this mode that I wish they would just get all the time, where it's like, oh, he has an actual race story. Well, he is going to think differently about things. And, so it leads to more interesting conversation with the really ideologically obsessed. So yeah, I shared some of that, and I'll share some now. Uh, I do really feel like I'm with my people when I'm hanging out with my cousins and aunties. I had the opportunity because I had a team in Ottawa that I was, so I was traveling to Ottawa a lot for that, and my aunt Myrtle lives there, so I just sat and talked to her, and she told stories about my grandma as a kid. She was the youngest in a Catholic family, so she's really not a lot older than me. I forget, it's like 15 years, maybe 20 years. So she was always like the fun younger aunt, but she grew up on the res. She was actually the last. Well, she was the last in the family, but she went to assimilation schools. And I tried to get her to talk about it. She did a little bit, and it was very interesting. But I could tell there was so much pain there that she didn't really want to go there. I tried to ask because I understood it. Why did I look into it further yet again? I've heard all the tales, but I kind of refreshed things. I realized, oh, they took these kids away and they could only come back during summer, and it was about 3 months. And there was no choice in the matter. The dad couldn't say, well, no, thank you. We're going to teach them ourselves. Crazy homeschooler. But why wasn't that, why isn't that a reasonable thing, for people that just kind of want to be left alone? They're living on a reservation. Yeah, they'll deal in the world of, in that case, Fort Frances, Ontario, but they're fundamentally Indian. They're Native Americans, they're Aboriginals. They use First Nation over there. A fun little anecdote about, or a little detail about the trips to Ottawa is because I was born in Canada and my parents basically smuggled me over the border. They failed to fill out paperwork that had they properly went across the border people would have demanded that document. So they must have fibbed their way through that. Well, it made it so that it was very difficult to prove my citizenship, and I finally accomplished that relatively recently. But when I first started going to Ottawa, the way I got across, it's weird. You can't fly, but you can drive or walk into Canada as long as you have a First Nation card. So I would fly to Syracuse and rent a car and drive north, and I would just show that card and I would get across. So yeah, there's a race story there, but when it comes down to it, for me to pretend like, dude, I'm from the res. I mean, I was downtrodden from the beginning. Yeah, there were problems when your grandma is so abused by, really it was mainstream culture. Think about that, right? Mainstream culture thought it was perfectly okay for her to be basically kidnapped, right? I mean, he really didn't have a choice. There was a threat of force. People need to think about that. And basically was taught to despise her parents' lifestyle. Well, what's the dad gonna do? He's powerless. I mean, what does a man do when you make him feel powerless? He drank himself to death. Yeah, that impacted me. But if anything, it made me appreciate, the things that you should appreciate, like the value of hard work, doing a good job, and things like that. And so I kind of went on, and a rough and tumble family that I'm born into, the stuff I told you about bikers and stuff, I was pretty rough around the edges, and I learned being polite, being more graceful in life. is a lot better. But then I hear all these remedies. I mean, Trudeau wants payments. He keeps promise he lures these people on because it never gets delivered, and I think they blame the courts or whatever. But reparations, and it's going to add up to 10,000. And it's funny. Some of my relatives, they just, oh, that's so great. I mean, $10,000. I don't want to sound like a snob, but that's ridiculous considering the echoes of that impact. And what does it solve anyway? I mean, it's probably going to lead to people doing more drugs and alcohol in some factions of that population, at the very least. It's not racist for me to say it. I know it. I've seen it up front. And I don't even care about those labels, by the way. So yeah, don't hang a label on yourself. Ultimately, I'm a culture critic. I'm fascinated with culture. I'm fascinated with how people think, and and I'm disappointed when they don't really, they ultimately fail to think. That's fine. That's we can still get somewhere that's interesting in conversation, as long as you're not holding these damn cliches that people are using to manipulate political outcomes, right? Oh, do you want to talk about sex? You want to talk about race? It's ridiculous. It's exploitation. So these people, come on, it's not funny. It's really kind of sick. It's not kind of sick. It's sick. You're celebrating a sickness, right? That man who shot the protesters obviously didn't take well to the manipulations blasted at him, and it's the same problem on the other end. So they're dividing us. They're making us not even be able to. We can't even see common ground, and we think it's funny that it ends up in violence. I mean, let's get real here. Thank you.